Bon dia, Cordia. Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat where I'm in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. And this is Fireside Chat 176. But as is customary, I start with a prayer for peace. Gomara Siacán ar fud na crinne. Gomara Siacán in our jaili agus in our jirha. Gonairi lin lena cuid garmacha. Gamuid buchas dív, je chuvdacha is spirit chuvdacha. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities. For peace. As the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. That those who make riches from violence and war might hear in their dreams the cries of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lamb, that our swords be beaten into ploughshares, and no hurt or harm be done anywhere along the Holy Mountain, with thanks to John O'Donoghue. So, you're all very, very welcome. And let me see, Western Washington, Wyoming, excuse me, sunny Belgium, actually it's sunny Ireland too, I'm very, very pleased to say. Eastleigh in Hampshire, New York, Pennsylvania, Penzance, West Cornwall, Wanui Beach, New Zealand. Lovely to see you all. You're all so, so welcome. So we are going to Wales. And let me introduce my guest this evening, Mara Starling. Mara, you're so, so welcome.
Oh, hello. Yes, lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
We're delighted. Now, I know, are you actually living in Wales now? I know you're from Wales, but are you living, are you on the Welsh?
No, technically. Technically, I'm not. So I'm originally from Ynys Môn, Anglesey, up in the tippy top of the north of Wales, and my family still live there, and I still consider their home. But a few years ago, my partner and I moved just over the border, technically living in England, even though I can see Wales literally out of my window. And we're living now in Chester, which is a gorgeous city, just on the banks of the River Dee or Afon Dyfrdwy. We're only like a short drive away from home, but we get to experience the magic of this city now as well. But we're going to end up back home one day as well.
And of course Chester is a Roman town. Yes.
Oh, yes, it's gorgeous here. There's so much history. It feels as though you're living in a museum. I'm fortunate enough, I live in the city centre itself, which is glamorous, gorgeous, all these like glorious Tudor-style buildings. And, it's a place where you cannot really go for a walk without stepping on history in some way. One of my favourite walks is down by the river. There's a little path through an area that we call Edgar's Field. And Edgar's Field is nowadays mostly just a park, but on the path as you walk through the field, there's a shrine to the Roman goddess Minerva right there on the banks of the River Dee. So it's almost like you're living in this landscape, which on one hand, yes, is like living in a history museum, like living somewhere where you can feel the echoes of the past really viscerally, but it's also a sacred landscape with the River Dee flowing through with all the goddesses and stories associated with her. And then Minerva right there on the river, a shrine that's thousands of years old that people have come to for so long.
And you said it in Welsh. Did you say the Black Avon? You said, you said it in Welsh?
Afon Dyfrdwy. So it's similar to D, but it's dwy at the end there. Afon Dyfrdwy translates it really interestingly, actually. That's a topic that I don't see enough people talk about, but it is a really interesting one in that the translation for the name of the River Dee in Welsh is not necessarily River Dee, but instead the river of the water deity, the water divine, water goddess. So it's got the word dyfr in there, which comes from dwfr, which is dŵr, water, and then dwy, which comes from dwyfol, meaning sacred, divine, or just
Ah.
god, goddess, whatever. So it's literally the river of divine waters.
Oh, it sounds so much nicer when you put it that way than the D. You mentioned, in addition to Minerva, that there are other goddesses associated with the D. So, what goddesses are there?
Oh, yes. So there are some kind of shadowy elements of folklore and mythology that are woven into the history of the Dee. We know of one goddess called either Eirwen or Eironwen, who we don't know much about other than that she is ascribed to in certain texts and referred to every now and then throughout history as being a goddess who lives on the banks of the River Dee, is associated with that river. And she specifically is mentioned as being a goddess who is tied to the fate of battle, to the fate of conflict. So people would pray to her when conflict or war was taking place, and she would have a sway or a hand in what happened during those conflicts. So she would be able to kind of maneuver fate in any direction. But again, she's a very shadowy goddess. We don't know much about her beyond that and her ties to the River Dee. But then there's also the fact that so the Avon Dyfrdwy, the River Dee, it runs directly through Llyn Tegid, which of course Llyn Tegid is the mythological, the folkloric home of Ceridwen, the witch goddess. So when I first moved here, I felt almost disconnected from my home and my heritage, my culture, because though, as I said, I look out my window, I peek my head out the window and look down that way, and I can see the hills of North Wales. I can see Wales directly there. And if I were to live about half a mile down the road, my postcode would be Welsh. But because I'm here, and technically my postcode is an English postcode, which means I have to pay for prescriptions, which I didn't have to do in Wales, it means that I felt this kind of sense of almost as though I was abandoning home when I moved here. It was almost like, oh, I'm
Mhm.
abandoning the place that I call home. But then Chester, Caer, we have a Welsh name for it, Caer. Chester kind of kept reminding me that I'm not abandoning home at all, that I'm constantly connected to home. One way that that was made apparent is the fact that because we're so close to Wales, you hear the Welsh language constantly. We're specifically very close to North Wales. The A55 runs through Chester, which goes directly up to Anglesey. So people come here to shop and you hear the Welsh language just as you're walking through the town. Very often as well, like pretty much every day when I walk around, I hear people speaking Welsh. So that doesn't seem as like completely foreign to me. It's like, oh yeah, this is just like home. But then the River Dee itself, when I found out that the River Dee connects to Llyn Tegid, to the lake in Bala,
Mhm.
which is of course the folkloric home of the goddess Ceridwen, who is one of the primary goddesses I work with within my practice, I instantly felt like, no, this can be home for a little bit, for a little while, until I'm ready to return to the island.
It's beautiful how rivers connect us like threads, or they're like an umbilical cord, that
Yeah.
lifeline. And it just struck me, because Chester is a Roman town, and when you think of what the Romans did in Anasman, uh, how yes, but then you have your own. I assume it was. I mean, obviously, it was Welsh British before the Romans came. Caer.
Mhm.
Does Caer mean city?
It does. It's literally, it just translates to mean like a fortification, a fort or a city. So it's very simple translation, just Caer, fort or city.
Well, we have Caher, which is fort or
Mm.
city in Irish. Very, very similar.
Oh yes. It is, and I find that there are a lot of similarities like that as well. There's a kind of joke I always say in talks and such when I deliver workshops and talks across the world, because of course the Celtic languages have that two distinct family trees: the Q Celtic and P Celtic, the Brythonic and the Goidelic languages, and Irish is over there in the Q Celtic corner, the Goidelic corner, and Welsh is over here in the Brythonic corner. So there is this kind of, though although I feel like the Irish are my cousins and I feel a kinship with the Irish, the Scottish, the Manx and such, there's this feeling as well that we are cousins, whereas Cornwall and Brittany are our siblings because of that direct tie with language. And the joke I always mention to people is, if you threw me into a room and left me for 20 minutes with somebody who cannot speak a single word of any language except for Cornish, then give me about 15 minutes and I will figure out what they're saying, because Cornish and Welsh are so similar in the way that they are structured, because they are both Brythonic Celtic languages. But throw me in a room with an Irish speaker and I probably would just huddle up in the corner and cry, because it would not be that easy for me to fully get the gist of it in just 20 minutes. But then in saying that, there are a lot of similarities as well. Like, I come across a lot of words, a lot of phrases, a lot of things that I see either on road signs or on maps or in stories that I can relate to when it comes to the Irish language and the Welsh language. There's a lot of similarities there as well.
Yes, and you have
Yes.
Anovan. Okay, that means deep, but also the world. Am I right?
Yes.
Well, we have Dawan, which means deep and also the world, and it's DOMH. We don't. I don't know if any of us you could pronounce Dovan, but we don't. We go Dawan. The H silences the M, but it's the same. It's deep and it's the earth, and you have the similar one. Now that always fascinates me.
Yeah. Oh
And
gosh, yes.
similar word for oak.
Yeah, definitely similar word for oak, because ours, of course, is derwen or deru, which is very much related to the word for druid as well, derwydd, and then in Irish.
Well, it's we've place names called Daro, Daru, which is oak, Dara, Dir, Dar. Um, yeah. So they're more than. I'm always fascinated by the connections. Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
But
More connections than we think.
Sean Clancy says, to be fair, a lot of us Irish folk would struggle in a room with a native Irish speaker too. Speak for yourself, Sean Clancy. But yes, I agree. It depends on the dialect as well. Interesting. I can read Gaelic, Scots
Oh,
Gaelic. Their Sheena fathers are backwards, but when I read it, I go, I understand that. I if they spoke to me, I could hear it, but I couldn't repeat back what they said. But I would repeat it in the way I understood it in
mm,
Irish. So that's interesting. Sylvia Thorne says, it's so true, but rivers connect us like a thread. Just thinking about all the rivers I've lived near in my life, thanks. I would see my rivers, as you say, were coursing threads in my life. Yes. And what I also like, I have the River Nore outside my house, and that's associated with the goddess Fola. We have three sisters rivers, the Nore, the Shure, and the Barrow, and they're associated with the three goddesses that, well, we had many, many goddesses, but the three sisters who the Celts, when they came, and Aragon, their druid, came to seek sovereignty, and they each offered to him, yes, you can have the land as long as you call the land after me. Now, Sean Clancy, who's the storyteller, has a slightly different version of that. We all have different versions of the story, but he promised each one of them to call the land after her, but he eventually called it after Eru, and so we have Era, Ireland. But
oh gosh.
so our rivers are all associated with goddesses: the Boyne, Boann, the Shannon, and the others. So it's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's similar over here because obviously I grew up on Anglesey so I grew up right next to a river, but that river I'm not sure has association with any particular goddess. That's the Avon Frau, the River Frau. River Frau just translates to mean like the excitable river, which when I
Lovely.
found that out, I was like, oh, that makes complete sense because it's a tidal river. And yeah,
Um,
she is very excitable. She changes her pattern, her course, and sometimes she's, fast flowing and dangerous, and other times she just looks like a little trickle. It's like you can never quite guess what she's going to do, which was great because I relate to that personality greatly. But then, like across just a little bit further down from me was the Avon Braint, which was a river that I crossed every day going to school, going to college, and such. And that river is associated with a figure that we would refer to as Braint, or in
yes.
later kind of Christian law, she's called Fireide, which is the Welsh expression of Brigid or breed. So that's that was something that I didn't know growing up until I kind of found my way onto paganism and druidry. And I love that my druidry, my paganism, my witchcraft has enabled me to deepen my relationship with my landscape, and a lot of it strangely has been through rivers. So yeah, rivers, the threads that guide us.
And I've crossed the River Bryant with Christopher Hughes and found red jasper that you can find in the Bryant. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was fascinated with the connection with Bridget, Bride. I just love that, and I know there's a monument to Bridget, isn't there? I've been there.
Oh, I think so, yes.
Yes. Anyway, so just tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, you brought up in Asman. What kind of a background was that? And then how did you navigate your spiritual path to get to, being an author, being a witch, being a druid, being famous?
Oh gods, I wouldn't quite go that far, but it's a strange one because it's really easy for us to over romanticize our pasts, and it's really easy to listen to other people talking about their pasts and to go like, oh gosh, they're full of shit, they're just talking out of their arse, and making stories up, making little stories about their life to make them seem more magical. But it genuinely is. When I talk about my upbringing on the island, it's really hard to talk about it without kind of sounding like I'm lying or being a big just romantic poet or something. But it genuinely was a very magical upbringing, with its problems, with its issues, with all the things that come with that. But I grew up in a tiny little village right on the coast, in the never eat shredded wheat southwest of the island. The village is called
Mhm.
Aberfraw, if anybody wants to look it up. Aberfraw, it's a beautiful seaside village. It only has about 600 people living in it. And, in that area, Welsh is the predominantly spoken language. So you often hear people talk down about the Welsh language and say, like, oh, only 20% of the Welsh population actually speak Welsh. But when you actually narrow it to like specific regions, we then see that it's a different story, because in the area I grew up, it was 60%, 70% of people
Wow.
spoke Welsh as their first language or spoke Welsh as their primary language. And so I went through my schooling and through my entire life with Welsh as the primary language that I expressed myself in, which is very handy because it means that if I ever put my foot in my mouth or say the wrong word, I can say, this is my second language. Don't blame me. So growing up with the Welsh language in itself was a privilege and a magic of its own, because not a lot of people in Wales can say that as well. But as well as that, I went to a school, a tiny little school that only had 26 students in total.
Wow.
And because it only had 26 students, and because it was a Welsh medium language school, there was this intimacy to the school. And the one thing I loved was that my teachers were very keen on teaching us about the magic of our landscape and the magic of our culture as well. So I always refer back to Miss Owen and Miss Parry, who were my teachers who used to read from books about, the Mabinogi and Welsh mythology, about folk tales concerning giants and fairies and mermaids and witches who supposedly were very much operative in the landscape that we were living in. So these stories weren't something that felt like some fantastical tales that happened in some long lost land far, far away. It was here. It was right there on my doorstep. And then beyond that, just the privilege of being surrounded by the very magic and beauty of the landscape of that place as well. People flock to Anglesey on bank holidays and in the summer from England and from all over the UK for a reason, because it's very, very pretty. So being raised with that as my backdrop, with all of these sacred ancient sites that date back to prehistory and such being my playground, it was really hard not to grow up with a love and an admiration for magic in a way. And I became very quickly in school known as the person who was obsessed with mermaids, fairies, and witches. So it only made sense that when I became a teenager, I really fell head over heels in love with paganism and witchcraft in general. It all started with my nine, my grandmother.
Hmm.
We called her Nine Mumu, because she lived on a farm with cattle. So she was Mumu grandmother, basically, which sounds awful, but she loved it. She absolutely loved it. And she was quite a flamboyant character. She had this like tight curly hair, and she had really long acrylic nails that she'd always have on, which were always painted a beautiful color. And she'd always greet us by tapping on the window with her nails. And so I thought of her as my witchy grandmother as well. And she had an interest in like what some people in my family refer to as like woo things. She was into crystal balls and tarot cards and tea leaf readings and such, even though she was a chapel going woman, very much a chapel going woman. And she died when I was quite young. She died when I was around 10, around that age. And so when she passed away, I kind of wanted to feel that magic again from her, because she was one of the few people in my family who made me feel like I belonged and was accepted for who I was. You know, growing up in a rural area is very romantic and very beautiful, but when you are
However,
am, when you are like me, when you are a queer little weirdo growing up in that area, there is this tendency for people to kind of bully you and look down their nose at you. So I was always seen as like the one that was weird, the one that was wrong in some way, because I didn't have the same interest as the
mhm,
other kids my age and such. And my grandmother never made me feel weird for being into the things I was into. She never tried to shame me for it. So then a few years later, after she died, I was in Llangefni, which is a town on the island, and I went into a charity shop and I found, and I actually have it right here because I was talking about it the other day, I found this, which is a little orange book called
ah,
Spells for Teenage Witches by Marina Baker, which, you know, if I read it nowadays, I just kind of, oh, I cringe and I laugh and I love it. It's so cheesy. It's so, I don't know, it's filled with spells, filled with rituals targeted towards teenagers. But that was my first introduction to the idea that witchcraft or paganism or some kind of nature based faith that had a belief in magic was a potentiality, was a real, actual, possible thing. So that led me on a little path to finding out more about witchcraft, which led me to meeting my mentor, Julie, who was a witch and she was larger than life and
mhm.
beautiful. Who she's also passed away now, unfortunately. But she happened to be BFFs with Christopher Hughes, who, of course, was the head of the Anglesey Druid Order, or is still, I don't know why I said
Mhm,
was, is the head of the Anglesey Druid Order, also a drag queen, also a TV personality.
mhm,
So then I was introduced to Christopher, introduced to the Druids of Anglesey, to a paganism that was specifically Welsh in nature and its expression. And it all just kind of spiraled from there. It all just kind of blew up from there. And I became absolutely obsessed with not only learning about the magic of my land and my culture, but sharing it with the world because I felt like there wasn't enough info out there. And I remember distinctly one of the first things that Christopher told me when I met him for the first time was if we don't see what we want to see in the world, then we need to create it. We need to put it into reality. So that's why I started doing my YouTube videos. Eventually, during lockdown, my TikTok videos, ventured into the world of TikTok, and then eventually wrote a book as well. So yeah, it all just came from that, from the desire that I had growing up. I always wished there were books on Welsh witchcraft and Welsh magic and such, and there were so few to find that I just thought, well, why am I waiting when I could just make it? So yeah, that's my advice to anyone listening: is if you don't see what you want in the world, make it yourself.
Well, that is beautiful. And I mean, we're going to talk about your books in a minute. So Ricky says, of course you're famous. My mum um, asked me about seeing you on TV and asked if I knew you because you were pagan. She lives in Llandrin, Llandrindod. Sorry,
Yeah.
mangling that. Apologies for that. Um, and was gobsmacked when I said I did. That's from Ricky Gellison. Beautiful.
Gosh. Oh yes, the odd little appearances I've done on television.
So how many books have you written so far?
So written, I've done three, but out in the world right now is two. The third one's coming out next month.
Now, where can people get your books?
Oh, pretty much anywhere books are sold. My two first books, Welsh Witchcraft and Welsh Fairies, they're published by Llewellyn Worldwide, so they should be available across the world, wherever you are, wherever you prefer to buy books. Here in the UK and elsewhere, you can find them on book-selling sites. So, like here, you can find them on places like Waterstones, Blackwell's, all of those places. You can get them on Amazon, but I don't usually tell people to go there. I usually recommend they go to their local bookseller because they're usually happy to order them in for you as well. Or you can ask your library to have them in as
Yes.
well. It's a lovely way of getting hold of them. My third book is a pagan portal book. So it's one of the smaller books which are much more accessible, and the ones that give you an insight into something but in a kind of bite-sized way. And I was very happy to write one of those for Moon Books.
Okay.
And that releases at the end of next month. And that should be also wherever books are sold, available to order, wherever you prefer to buy books.
And Jan says pre-ordered your Mabinogi book. So
Oh,
is this the big? Is that one you're talking about? The one that's coming
yes.
out? Oh,
Yes,
lovely.
Pagan Portals and Mabinogi coming out in
Oh, brilliant.
end of June.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Sean Clancy has a question. Do you find it hard to write about a faith and way of life that you're so passionate about? Your style is so informative and inspiring.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't find it necessarily hard to write about the magic of my culture and the things that I'm passionate about. I do find that my style has changed a lot from my first book. So my first book was my first introduction to ever writing a book in the first place, which not a lot of people give you much grace for. They don't give you much leeway, to kind of like, have you ever written a book? It's hard. That kind of thing I want to tell people all the time when they try and kind of look down their noses at it and such. But I look back at my first book now, and my first
Mm.
book I would describe as kind of like a love letter to the landscape, a love letter to the culture, whilst also delivering a little bit of my own personal path mixed in with the history and the mythology and the folklore, in hopes that if people saw how I did it, that they might be able to figure out how to do it for themselves as well. But one thing that I'll probably get in trouble with my publishers for saying this, but one thing that I look back at my first book at now and I kind of cringe and I go, oh, I wish I could redo that, are the exercises and the actual practical stuff that are in there, because that's something that a lot of publishers, they kind of want in their books when they publish pagan specific books, books on witchcraft, books on magic. They want you to write exercises and experiential things that people can partake in. But nobody told me how absolutely difficult trying to put these experiences that we have, whether it's in ritual, during magic, or whether it's during just little things that you do within your spiritual practice every day, trying to take all of that you do and put it down into words within a strict word count limit. It's so hard. And I struggled quite hard with that, especially when, I had my editors telling me, you need another exercise in this chapter and that chapter. It was like, oh, now I need to pull something out of the depths
Mhm.
of my hoo-ha in order to bring it forth into creation. And that can be really hard. And I look back at some of the exercises and such in my first book, and I can tell that I was struggling to fully put them out there. But then as well, when I look at the way that I'm developing now, I'm finding it easier as I go along because I'm learning how to do it and how to kind of express it. But I think the passion helps. If anybody's out there that's thinking of writing a book, that want to write something, but they're thinking to themselves, I just don't know what to write about. The advice that novelists always get told is write what you know, write what you know. And it's the same for pagan writers, for non-fiction writers. Write what you know, write what you are passionate about, write something that authentically speaks to who you are. And I hope that that's what I've done with my books. I hope anyway, but I can't speak on that or say that. My readers can decide that for me. But I hear nice things. So
Well, there's one here. I loved the love letter aspect of the book. It really resonated, even though Ireland is my focus, not Wales. Pat lives in Northern Ireland. So, and so I haven't read it. So, is that your first book or your second book, the love letter aspect?
So the first book is more like a love letter. It's called Welsh Witchcraft, a guide to the spirits, lore, and magic of Wales. And it was kind of a mixture of different things because I kind of shared as much information as I could about the culture of Wales within a magical context, because that was all the information that I struggled to find growing up. I would read books about paganism and witchcraft, and constantly they would talk about gods and goddesses and practices and rituals oriented around spirits that were from landscapes that were thousands of miles away from me. And I always kind of read these books and I thought, how does this fit into where I am? And surely, if they are speaking of gods associated with these landscapes that are so far away, we have something here as well. And of course, that led me on a little journey to figuring all that out. And it was through the help of people like the Anglesey Druid Order and Christopher and, you know, my friends and my mentors, that I really figured all that out for myself. And so the book is kind of like partly an investigation into the history and the lore and the magic of Wales through a pagan witchcraft lens, but then also is a little insight into how I kind of took inspiration and information from the past and implemented it into a practice that was rooted in the modern world, because we are people living in the modern world. So, you know, it's about taking these things and putting them, applying them to the real world. And so because of that, there are a lot of like personal experiences and such in there as well, which some people really don't like. But I find when I read witchcraft books, I like that, because I don't want just this is the lore. You know, you can buy old books on folklore to find that. What I want is, how are people interacting with this lore? How are people interacting with these gods? So yeah, there are some people that don't like it, but I'm still happy I did it that way, because like I said, it was a love letter to home, essentially.
Well, another great and informative book. So you're getting a nice response. So how did the one about, because I've seen your videos of you, um, you're so animated, you know, not quite flying, but almost flying in a landscape and talking about fairies and you know, inviting the viewer to follow you into another place. So how how is the second book different from the first one?
So when I wrote the second book, I kind of I did a bit of a boo-boo, really, because one of the things I did with my first book, keeping in mind that, you know, I'm not 30 yet, I'm still in my 20s, I'm still young, even though I might not look
Yes.
it, and I'm a sensitive little thing, really. So of course, when my book was released, I ran over to the reviews to see what people thought, which is a piece of advice that every author has told me, do
Don't
not do.
do.
Don't go read the reviews. The reviews are not for you, they're for other readers. People are silly and they will, you know, they'll put a 1-star review and write a review that's like, oh, I thought this was something different, so I'm going to give it 1 stars because I made an assumption and I was wrong. And yeah, there are a lot of reviews like that. But I also took a lot of the reviews that talked about how, you know, they weren't very appreciative of the more personal touches throughout the book, the ones that talk about my own personal journey. So my own story of how I connected with certain deities, of how I came to practice a witchcraft that was rooted in my own landscape, and how I kind of interact with these stories and elements of my culture and such. So when I went to write my second book, I thought, I want this book to be less of that and more just, you know, exploring the stories and the myths and lore with like a little bit of that personal stuff, because we're still going to like be providing people with an insight into how to, you know, approach these things from an operative and a practical and a modern perspective and context. So it's not just a list of stories and such. So when I went about researching and writing Welsh fairies, and it was kind of the book that I knew I was going to write. I knew I was going to write one about fairies because my entire life up until that point had been oriented around my love for fairy folklore and fairy mythology and belief and such. So I knew I wanted to write one specifically to Wales. And in that book, I kind of basically deep dived into various topics, and it's kind of a shame, really, because a lot of people, I think, read the title of the book, Welsh Fairies, and they make a decision on whether or not it's for them based on that, because they will think or assume that it's either a collection of stories about fairies, which it's not. There are plenty of books that do that already, so I didn't want to do that. Or they'll think it's only about fairies and nothing else, and maybe they don't have an interest in fairies. But the fairy beliefs, the fairy fairy faith within a Welsh cultural context, at least, as I'm aware, very similarly over in Ireland,
Mm.
they are interwoven into the beliefs of the landscape in general and connected deeply with our stories, our mythologies, our deities. So the book doesn't just explore fairies, it explores the concept of the other world. Like, what is the other world within a Welsh cultural context? Who lives in the other world? Do people live there? Is it an afterlife? Is it not an afterlife? Who are the gods associated with the other world? Like, so there's a chapter based around Gwyn ap Nudd. There's a whole
Mm.
chapter where I talk about deities associated with the other world, such as Rhiannon and Gwydion. Even Gwydion has an association with fairies and the other world. And then the primary thing that I really wanted to touch upon, because my work focuses on witchcraft within a Welsh cultural context, was the way in which magic and magical practice has been heavily tied with fairy beliefs and the fairy faith in Wales.
Mm.
So with that book, I kind of pulled away from sharing too much of my own personal stories, even though it is there occasionally. There's like one or two bits in there that I do that, but I tried to pull away from that and focus instead on, right, what are these stories? What are these beliefs? What are these folk tales? How do we interact with them? How do we understand them? And how can we know them on a deeper, more visceral level via explorations to do with like looking into history, looking into etymology, looking into folklore, and looking at practice? So that book was kind of more so, it was a lot more work. It took me around 5 years to write that book, whereas
Oh,
Welsh Witchcraft I wrote during the pandemic. So I wrote it in about a year and a half. So it was a much more kind of hands-on task. With Welsh Witchcraft, it was kind of like I was writing what I knew, and with Welsh Fairies, it was more I was challenging myself to dig deeper into what I knew. So I'm very proud of the second one, even though I know it probably sounds conceited to say that I'm proud of it, but I am.
I
I'm
should
very
hope
proud of
you
the second.
are. I should hope you are proud. There's some questions for you, some Mairead. Um, how and where did you do your research for Welsh witchcraft? I'd love to do more research myself and be interested to know if there's a specific library you went to, like Eimear's one, for example.
So a lot of my research into Welsh witchcraft was kind of in various different parts, I would say. A lot of it came from books, obviously. So a lot of it involved hunting down rare and out of print books. One of the leading figures in when you look at the more academic study of witchcraft within a Welsh cultural context is a guy called Richard Sugget, and his book, A History of Magic and Witchcraft in Wales, kind of acted as my primary source for the first book. And he's brilliant. He's so passionate about the history of witchcraft in Wales, and he has written that book as well as another book. And I managed to find both of them. And back when I was writing it, his the book, The History of Magic and Witchcraft in Wales, that was out of print when I initially went forth to try and find it. And I had this really strange story where I was trying desperately to track it down. And then one day I got a random phone call from an unknown number, and I answered the phone, and it was a woman from a shop in Hay-on-Wye, of all places, the book town. If you're a book lover, do look up Hay-on-Wye. And she kind of was sheepishly on the phone going, "Is that Mara?" And I didn't know who she was. So I was like, why is this random person calling me? Is this a scam call? And she said to me, "I've heard that you're looking for this book. I have it, and you can have it for £15." And I thought, who is this, and why are they offering me the best deal ever? Because the cheapest one on eBay was £300.
Yes.
So yes, I will take it for £15. If this is a scam, I'm down £15. And I had a weird story to tell people, but it wasn't a scam. I actually got the book. So
Wonderful.
strange things and synchronicities seem to happen to lead me to being able to write the book, really, to find these sources. I had one privilege on my side, which was that I am a fluent first language Welsh speaker. So I found a whole body of books associated with folklore and magic within the Welsh language itself, which a lot of people don't have access to because they don't speak the language. So books like Coelion Cymru by Evan Isaac, and Llen Gwerin Sir Gaernarfon by Myrddin Fardd. These were like really instrumental in helping me learn as well. But what books I couldn't find myself, couldn't track down myself, I also went to libraries. My local library that I went to a lot was Bangor University's library. Bangor University has an entire Welsh section, and it's beautiful. Oh my gosh, it's like walking into kind of like the essence of what I would imagine is porn to the eyes of book lovers. It's just gorgeous in there. So it's nice to spend time in there as well, to be with the books in there. But then I also went to Cardiff's Special Collections Library as well, down in the south of Wales. And of course, yes, Aberystwyth as well. Aberystwyth has a good collection as well. So those places are really good to go. But I also wanted, when I was doing my research, to look outside of the books as well, because, books aren't the be all and end all either. So a lot of the knowledge was actually taught to me by mentors, by people that I trust, and also came from stories that were told to me by elders in my community. So there are some things that I discovered where I was like, maybe sitting with my grandmother, and I would talk about, I've just read about cunning folk, cunning men that used to help heal people that had certain ailments. And then my grandmother, my nine, would the one that's still alive, not the one that died. My nine would turn around and go, "Oh yeah, Jane down the road used to do that. She used to make this kind of like poultice that used to help with all sorts of things." And then I'd be like, "No, no, no, tell me more, explain more." So then through that, I found a lot of different things, and I loved that when I was on my little trips going to these historically and folklorically significant place, people would just kind of open up. You'd tell them that you're studying witchcraft or you're a practicing
Mm.
witch, and you'd kind of expect the pitchforks to come out. But instead, people would be like, "Oh, I've got a story I can tell you, actually. So my granddad used to go to this weird man down the road who used to heal his arthritis." And it was, these little stories that I loved as well. So it was tracing down these kind of oral histories and folk traditions as well. So being in the landscape, speaking the language was a real privilege, and being able to do those things as well.
Oh, beautiful. Now, another question from Sean. If it doesn't get you into trouble, could you advise if you have found publishers hard to deal with? Always looked at the likes of Glennie Kindred, who self publish, and wonder if it's easier or harder, or if you lose autonomy through a publisher.
Yeah, I would say, and I probably won't get into trouble because the truth is, the publishers that I've worked with have been amazing. Um, some people have had, negative experiences with the publishers that I've worked with, but I haven't. So I can only speak for my own experience. From my own experience, my publishers have been really great at helping me kind of narrow down what it is that I want to do and figure out how to come up with ideas that are more focused. So I'm a very scatterbrained person, and a lot of the times when I go to my editors with ideas, they're just like, "I don't know what this is. Let's like deconstruct and figure out what's going on here." And I appreciate that. I appreciate somebody who can take the mess of my thoughts and organize them. So if you're like me in that regard and you have a bit of a chaotic mind that's all over the place, it does help to have an editing team behind you who can help kind of draw things out. And I hope I won't get into trouble for kind of comparing the two, but the two publishers that I've primarily worked with, I have also worked with others in smaller capacities by doing, small kind of works in anthologies and such like that. But the two publishers I've primarily worked with are Llewellyn Worldwide and Moon Books, which Moon Books is an imprint of Collective Ink. And both of them are very different and yet also really brilliant to work with. Moon Books is much more of an intimate, kind of very close-knit community. There's like only a few people on the team, so you know everyone and you know what's going on, and you can kind of email them and you know the whole team. Llewellyn obviously is the biggest publishing house dealing with spirituality, magic, witchcraft, paganism in the world. I would say it's one of the biggest and oldest publishing houses dealing with those things. So they are a bit bigger, and yet it's still quite close knit as well. I feel very close to my editors and to my publicists. Moon Books kind of feels very much like it's author led, so it's like you are in charge, you get to do whatever. They don't highly edit your books. They do, they make a run through and edit what needs to be edited, but they won't like tell you what your book needs to be titled, or they won't tell you that you need to remove a whole section unless it's like really egregious or something. Whereas Llewellyn is a bit more like, they are very hands-on with the way that they work, and I really appreciate that because,
Mhm.
like I said, scattered all over the place. So if you are the type of person who needs reining in sometimes, who needs help, then I would very much suggest going to a publishing house, because it means that you get that help, you get the aid of your editors, and sometimes they make you want to cry. I
I,
sometimes have to I sometimes have to read the notes that they send me after I've sent in a manuscript, and I just have to go sit in a corner and kind of cry a puddle to myself for a while. And then, I pick myself up, dust myself off, and I go, right, they only want what's best. They're only doing this because they want the book to be the best thing it can be. So back to it, back to the action. And then when the book is actually out, I'm really appreciative for those moments, that I could have those moments where I could be kind of structured a bit better and such. But I do know as well a lot of people who have self-published their books. I've never done it, but because I don't think I would ever follow through. I'm very bad at following through on a project unless I'm, have someone behind me with a ruler ready to slap me across the face if I don't deliver to an end line, a deadline. So yeah, I like having those deadlines. I like having somebody to kind of speak to and ask for help. I like having somebody to help structure my work. But a lot of other people might feel different and might prefer the freedom that self-publishing offers. Sometimes, it depends on how many you sell, really, but sometimes self-publishing can offer a higher percentage in royalties. Sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of apples and pears. You kind of have to just figure it out as you go along. But for the most part, I've really enjoyed my process of working with both Llewellyn and Moon Books. It's been absolutely lovely so far.
I'm impressed with your ability to recover after being given notes. Because I was going to ask you, how do you cope? But anyway, you've already answered. Coped with, somebody guiding you. But of course, you see, once you recognize they want to publish the book, and
Yeah,
that's the thing, they have the yours and their best interest at heart. So wonderful.
absolutely.
So Jane, who's in Canada, how do you feel the folk magic of Wales intersects with modern pagan magic and practices?
So this is something that I actually, it's one of my special interests, I would say, is the influence that Welsh culture has had on the culture of modern paganism in its entirety. And of course, modern paganism in the guise that we know it today, it has taken a little bit of inspiration from various different parts of the world. Because modern paganism, especially modern witchcraft as we know it today, was primarily built on the kind of groundwork of British people who were looking to the magic of their landscape, their lands. And back then in the 1950s, when they were forming these religions and these organizations and such, they had this very rooted belief that they kind of had free picking at every culture that existed in kind of what we see as the
Mhm.
United Kingdom. So they would pilfer Wales and Scotland and Cornwall, and they would do whatever they wanted with it because it was theirs, because they were British. And then they would also look over the water to Ireland, and they would go, of course we can
Yeah.
look to Ireland, why not? So you see influences of Irish culture, of Welsh culture, very prominently in traditions like Wicca, traditional witchcraft, and then also really heavily in Druidry as well, where the Welsh influence is very clear on Druidry because of the influence of people like Iolo Morgannwg, who were instrumental in the rise
Mhm.
of Neo-Druidry. So I have a real huge special interest in the way in which our culture has influenced and inspired the way in which people approach witchcraft and paganism in the modern world. I love it. And I am particularly fascinated in the way that a lot of people practice things that have their root in Welsh culture without knowing it, without realizing it, without actually acknowledging it. And I'm sure those who look into Irish traditions and such would probably say the same thing. It's like you come up across these things sometimes and you think, oh, I know where that came from because I know the stories of my landscape. But do other people know that that's where it
Mm.
came from? So one of the things that I haven't had confirmed yet, but it's something that I'm really fascinated by, is the concept of the year and a day in the initiatory process, which is something you see in a lot of modern pagan traditions, that before you get initiated into a tradition of witchcraft, that you have to study for a year and a day, which I've never heard anyone really explain why a year and a day succinctly, but my belief has always been that it's attached in some way to the mythology behind Ceridwen, who created a potion of pure awen, of inspiration. That story in and of itself is an initiatory story in and of itself, so it's very much, in the same realms of initiation. You can see why people would turn to that as an inspiration for initiation. Inspiration for initiation, that sounds fun. But then in that story, Ceridwen, in order to create this potion of
Mm.
awen, she has to study, work, and gather ingredients for a year and a day, and that's how long the potion takes to steep. So, in my mind, that there was a clear connection between those two things. So, I love to find those kind of threads and the way that Welsh culture has influenced things in that way. And one thing that I find particularly interesting is there's quite a big kind of, I hope I don't get into trouble for talking about this topic now or cause any uproar, but there's a lot of discussions in the pagan spheres, in pagan communities nowadays, about things like cultural appropriation, very rightfully so,
Mhm.
talking about, should we be pulling basically a pick and mix culture together by drawing on all these different things from different cultures, when there's rarely ever much respect or acknowledgement to those cultures in the first place. So I like that we're talking about these things. I like that we're discussing them. And one thing that comes up a lot is the idea that Wicca, as it exists, is a religion, is a faith that, a lot of people see as controversial. They see it as a controversial belief system because they apparently view it as a belief or a religion that was built almost entirely on cultural appropriation, which, we could discuss and debate that for ages, whether or not it was. But I find it really fascinating that people have that belief. They have that belief that Wicca is a religion that's purely just appropriated the practices of all these different cultures, and that it
Mhm.
has no unique thoughts, it has no unique views. It's just different cultures smushed together to create this modern witchcraft that was very popular in the 50s and 60s and onwards. But then, in the same breath, when people read books like mine and they see things like the concept of working magic within a ritual circle or calling to the four elements, they will criticize the book for being too Wiccan. And I just always kind of turn around and I go, so let me get this straight. Wicca appropriates everything from other cultures, but if I practice magic that draws upon similar things to what Wicca draws upon, I am just Wiccan in my belief system, and therefore my book is just Wicca, but with a Welsh expression. Do you not think that if you believe that Wicca culturally appropriated things from other cultures, that maybe the cultures they appropriated things like, those things that you're criticizing my book for being too Wiccan, were Welsh in the first place? So I kind of, obviously there's a lot to it than that, there's a lot of nuance to that conversation, but it's something that I find really interesting is
Mhm.
there's obviously been a lot of influence from the Celtic cultures in modern paganism and witchcraft, and I don't think people acknowledge it as much as they should. And I'd love to explore that, and it is something that I have been exploring. I've delivered talks on the subject, but yeah, it's a fascinating one. It's almost like you can't win in that regard.
No,
If you
you
are
can't.
no, if you are Wiccan, you're just appropriating. But if you're not Wiccan, then you must just be Wiccan anyway secretly. I don't know. I don't know how it works.
It's very, very interesting. Sylvia, this is something. Oh, there's an echo. Anyway,
Oh,
thanks so much for being compelling today, Mara Starling. Listening to your fire forged, strong, perfect King's English through your bearing and manner, awesome feminine divine energy of light and courage.
that's lovely. Thank you. Oh my goodness.
Isn't it lovely? And
It is.
Cara Louise Jones, do you know any chants from Wales? I'm looking for a chant that connects to the landscape and belonging, but language less.
Oh, so in terms of chants and such, it's difficult because a lot of our chants, a lot of our so our culture, as most of the Celtic nations' cultures, is an inherently bardic culture. It's a bardic tradition, a bardic culture at its root. In our national anthem, we call ourselves Gwlad Beirdd a Chantorion, which translates to a land of bards and singers. So we love to sing and we love to write poetry. We love to do all those things. So when we look for things to chant, to utilize in ritual to draw upon from the wellspring of to create and construct magical ritual, we have a lot that we can turn to, a lot that we can turn to. So there's the poetry of Taliesin, the poetry of the ancient bards. There's then the stories in the Mabinogi and such that we can turn to. But of course, a lot of them are in Welsh. So when you try and translate them from English to Welsh, or from Welsh to English even, it loses a little bit of its magic.
Mhm.
Um, a one poem, which is quite an old poem, but is also really beloved in the modern world as well. I've heard this poem recited at the National Eisteddfod, which is our kind of biggest festival of the year that celebrates Welsh culture and specifically poetry. I remember as a kid hearing this poem being recited at these Eisteddfods and such, but I utilize it today in my modern practice as a call to the Tylwyth Teg, to the fairies, when I'm practicing ritual. So the invocation goes, O'r glaswellt glân a rhedyn man, gyfeillion diddan dewch, ei ddarfur nawn, mae'r lloer yn llawn, y nos yn gyflawn gewch. O'r chwarae sydd ar dwyn y dydd i'r dolydd awn ar daith, na ni sydd lon, ni chaiff ger bron, farwolion ran o'n gwaith. Which, when you listen to it in Welsh, has a very rhythmic quality. It rhymes and such. And then when you try and translate it in a literal sense, it loses that a little bit. But there is an English translation, and it's something like, from grasses bright and bracken light, come, sweet companions, come. The full moon shines, the sun declines, we'll spend the night in fun. In playful mirth, we'll trip the earth to meadows green, let's go. We're full of joy without alloy, which mortals may not know. And that's in my book. That's in both of my books. But there's a lot of little things like that that we can draw upon as well. These poems and such that are ancient and that are old, or that come from like the folk tradition, from folk practices and such. But my personal favorite thing to do is also to create my own.
Yes.
So they're also in my books, they're also in my work, and on my free kind of services as well. I also do like YouTube and Patreon and podcasts and all sorts. So if you look me up on those, there are plenty. But what we also have is a corpus of traditional charms, which we call in Welsh swynion. Swynion is a beautiful word. It comes from the word swyn, which means to charm or to enchant. And
Beautiful.
charms, or swynion, within this context were essentially empowered words that were either spoken or written down, and they held a certain magical quality that then, if you uttered the charm or if you wrote it down and carried it with you, that quality, that magical virtue the charm was ascribed, would be carried with you. So some of them are good for healing illnesses, some of them are good for protecting yourself or your home or your livestock, some of them are good for finding treasure or coming across good
Mm.
luck in your life. And though I love these charms, I love that we have this kind of almost catalogue of charms that we can turn to. But a lot of people overlook them because they come from a period of time, at least the majority of the ones we have, they come from a period of time where Wales was already Christianized. So they have certain like elements within them that draw upon the beliefs of Christianity, which then turns off pagans because they don't want anything to do with that. So I think the magic of the Swinion, the magic of the charms, are being lost a little bit because people refuse to look at them. And my kind of uh, recommendation to people always is, why can't we alter them? Why can't we alter them to suit our needs? But also,
Yes.
there are secrets woven into them as well. There are secrets woven into these charms that are kind of beyond the Christian faith as well. So, one of my favorite charms is a protection charm, which is referred to usually as the Credo Fechan charm. And it goes something along the lines of Credo Fechan, Credo Lan, Credo I Dduw ac Ifan, rhag y dwfr, rhag y tân, rhag y sarffes goch ben llydan. Cerddais fynydd ac o'r fynydd, a welais faer wen ar ei gobennydd, a'i angel, angel ifydd, a dyw ei hun yn dedwydd. A'r gŵr llwyd a'i wys gwen, yn llunio llen rhwng pob enaid ac uffern. Amen. So the translation is something along the lines of a little creed, a holy creed, a creed to God and John the Baptist, easily replaced with your goddess and god of
Yes.
choice, against the fire, against the water, and against the broad-headed red serpent. I walked up a mountain, and from the top of the mountain, I could see the beautiful Virgin Mary, and her angel was a dutiful angel, and God himself was watching in joy. And behind me, and this is where it gets a bit odd, and there's like a bit of a magical spooky ooky vibe to it. It goes, and from behind me came a grey man in a grey robe, and he drew a veil of protection around me and all those near me. And I just love that. I love that ending, that idea of this grey figure coming and drawing a veil of protection. And that's exactly what the charm supposedly does. It draws a veil of protection over anyone. So we have those as well. There are some chants and charms and invocations within the Welsh language as well that have found their way into modern paganism. So one of the most popular ones in Druidry is, of course, yr awen a ganaf, or Dwfn y dygaf. The awen I sing, from the deep I bring it. And then we also have Gweddi'r Orsedd, which of course is, in its original Welsh, is the call of the Gorsedd tradition, but has been translated, and it's that prayer that kind of starts with, I can't remember how it goes now. The prayer of the Orsedd. Too much thingies in my hand, but it's the
You mean
Druid's
the
prayer.
Druid's prayer? Yeah.
Yeah, essentially. The Druid's prayer is taken
Grant us for
inspiration.
thy protection. Yeah.
Yes, that one. Grant us spirit thy protection. And then, yeah, so that one has a Welsh equivalent as well. So a lot of them are very much rooted in those kind of traditions, and there's a lot that we can draw upon.
I agree with you. And it was interesting as you were talking, we have the same Irish charms, and it might be Bridget or Mary or whoever it is. And I use them, but I just replace them. I use spirit, great spirit, and I will do it in Irish. So all of this is possible, and I've shared this lorica, which is lúrach is the Irish word, an old Irish word for lorica, which is a breastplate, which is a prayer of protection. And you just put in spirit or whatever deity, if you want to use a deity, into it, because regardless of where a prayer of protection comes from or a charm, they have a purpose and there's a magic to them. And whether it's coming from Jesus, Mary, or Bridget, or Gwynap Neither, or wherever it is coming from, it all has a validity, and it's about making it your own.
Absolutely. Yes, it's definitely what I try and do. I take these charms, and I think there's also a magic to knowing that if they are properly old historical charms, I'm not a big believer that antiquity is the very much the root of authenticity. I think things can still be modern and still very valid and authentic. But
Absolutely.
also there's a magic to knowing that these charms have been uttered for generations, for centuries, and for the same purpose. And when you chant them, when you kind of recite these charms, you're not just saying it with yourself. All of the people who have said it before you are also standing there in that lineage with you then, and you're drawing upon them as much as you're drawing upon yourself. So it's almost like stepping into a stream of tradition which extends far beyond you, and there's a magic to that as well.
Again, that's that thread,
Mhm.
that river, from way back, and with tributaries taking us right into the future. Jane says, wonderful chat. Thank you both for this little bit of magic on a dull Thursday. And Liz, who's in Wyoming, you are such a font of wisdom, Mara. I look forward with enthusiasm your burgeoning career and how much your presence will continue to enrich the pagan community.
Oh,
Now,
goodness.
Cara, this is a big ask. Mara, you're such a source of knowledge. Would you be able to send me some of those in writing?
Oh, so I could. So my email address is very, very simple. My business email address is just mara.starling@gmail.com. So if you would like them in
Mara
writing,
I'm putting it in here,
yes. And but
gmail.com.
but beyond that as well, they are all in my books and in some of my online material. So if you don't have an interest in buying my books, that's fine too. I also have YouTube videos, and some of them are already on YouTube and such, ready to look up as well. So do have a look on there. But yes, if you want them just in writing from me, that's very easy for me to copy and paste them over to you.
That's very kind of you. And Sylvia says, thanks for reiterating the importance of making the experience your own. We must always navigate our own ship. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So it's been such a joy talking to you. And, we've gone over the hour. And I'm kind of uh, a concern. Well, what would you say? A concern you have for the modern world. This is going off piste now.
Oh gosh, a concern I have for the modern world. I think there's been a tendency lately to scapegoat, and it's something that I'm seeing more and more every single day, where there's this desire in the world to find a cause for all the problems that we have. And I understand that need tremendously. I understand it because, we are living in a time that is in many ways unprecedented, though I would argue a lot of the things that are happening are very precedented. We had the signs of these things many years ago, and a lot of people didn't act or didn't believe that it was happening. So now that we're seeing the effects of that, whether it's through, the constant spiral of these strange beliefs and views and hatred and intolerance just growing and such, or whether it's, the cost of living crisis, the fact that people are struggling with just living their day-to-day life and such. So amidst all this, I understand the need that some people have to find a reason why certain groups, certain individuals might be the blame. But I think it's important that a concern I have in particular is that I don't think enough people are questioning what the motives of certain very influential figures who are making it very known who they believe the scapegoats of these situations should be. What are their motives, and what are they trying to sway your head away from? What are they trying to hide in the process? And I hope I'm not going too conspiracy theory when I say that. I just mean that, when we have these billionaires and these politicians standing in front of us telling us that the woes of the world, that the problems of the world are all because of trans people, immigrants, queer people in general, because of Palestinians, because of every single group you can think of that is the new scapegoat of the week. When you have these really big, rich billionaires and politicians standing in front of you saying that, how long will it take for people to stand up and go, could it not be you? Could it not be the rich people in charge that maybe are the issue, rather than the poorest of the poor, the most marginalized people, the most at risk people, rather than those tiny minorities of people? Could it not be the ones with the actual power at the top? So a concern I have is that we are turning our heads away from the real problem and finding people to blame. And I think it's time we start realizing and acknowledging that we are more connected than we are separate. And, if anybody's watching this and they have fallen for the belief that trans people are inherently dangerous and evil, well, here I am, a trans person in front of you. I hope I don't look dangerous and evil. And I promise you, I'm not just one of the good ones. It's not that there are bad trans people and I'm just one of the good ones. No, most trans people are like me, living their lives day by day. Do you really think I'm to blame for why you can't afford rice at the grocery shop, or why you can't pay your bills, or why there's a war going on here, there, and everywhere lately? It's about time that instead of looking at people like me, or people who are on benefits, or people who have come here from war-torn countries, it's time we start looking at those who are in charge, who have a lot of money, and going, why aren't you doing more? And why are you choosing the most vulnerable in society to act as the scapegoat in these situations? And I think part of that concern for me, and it's something I touched upon when I was at the Winter Gathering last year, is, a big part of druidry and magic and witchcraft for me throughout my entire life, throughout my entire practice, has been trying to live in accordance with the wisdom of the trees. Druidry is very much rooted in the wisdom of the oak, the wisdom of the trees, the wisdom of the grove. Witchcraft, in one of the words for witchcraft, or one of the words for witch in Welsh, is gwyddon, which means they who are aware of the power of trees, they who are linked with the trees in some way. So I always say, the forest takes care of its brethren, the forest takes care of its own. are we doing that as pagans? Are we living in accordance with the wisdom of the trees? And what could we be doing to live in better accordance with the wisdom of the trees as we move forward? A lot of people relate to the history of witchcraft because of the oppression and the scapegoating and the marginalization that people who were accused of witchcraft went through. But then, if you're falling for these scapegoats that are going around right now, if you're falling for the idea that trans people are all monsters, that refugees are all coming here to destroy us, then you're falling for the same tactics that were happening during the witch trials. So maybe take a closer look and ask yourself, how can I live in better accordance with the wisdom of the trees? So yeah, I hope that wasn't me getting too much on a soapbox, but
No, a nice soapbox it is. I think, I mean, absolutely. And one that concerns me, I mean, I would do this if a client comes to me, because I'm a psychologist, and they're worried about X, Y, and Z. It's like we always do a little bit of reality testing. So, where have you found in your experience X, Y, and Z? So, what trans person has done this, blah, 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 or what refugee? Let's look at this. Can you find concrete examples of where you've seen it? If you've seen where a certain person with a particular recognizable characteristic has hurt you, fine. You can, people can get frightened because they can, once bitten, twice shy. But actually interrogating your points of view, particularly when we all have biases and we all have prejudices, absolutely. But we need to interrogate them. We need to say, where actually is this coming from? And have I concrete evidence? And most tempting to know it's a fear.
Mhm.
Where actually is it? And I think that's really, really important. So, absolutely, a good soapbox. Now, having said that, so Robin Mitchell says, because I want to ask my next question, is Mar, you're inspiring to a queer druid witch who lives next to Wales. Your book has been so helpful. So that's really nice. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope? Oh my goodness, so much. So I think the main thing that gives me hope is the sheer way in which joy overcomes in the end of it all. So when all these things are going on in the world, all these things that we just talked about, all these horrible things that make me concerned for the world, it's easy to believe that the world is becoming a very bleak place, filled with hatred, filled with intolerance. And then I step outside my door. I look away from the headlines. I look away from the news. And that's not to say to turn a blind eye to what's going on. It's important to be, aware of what's going on as well. But the moment I actually step out into the world and into our communities, I suddenly realize just how much love and joy there is everywhere. And I know I sound like a very hippy dippy person saying that, love and joy everywhere in the world, but it's true, absolutely
Yeah,
true.
I agree with
And
you.
I hope I can say this without sounding rude or anything like that. But one example that was very, very clear to me in recent memory was actually coming to the Obod Winter Gathering, because there's this assumption of what Obod is and who is part of Obod, and I was so nervous. I was bricking it coming to Obod to speak at the Winter Gathering. I thought, oh, I'm going to get booed off the stage. I'm going to have people coming up to me saying nasty things, whether it's because I'm a witch, whether it's because I'm trans, whether it's because I'm Welsh, whatever. Somebody's going to come up to me and say something. They're going to, think I'm pedantic and up my own arse because I have a love for my culture, and they're going to think that's somehow scathing them. They're going to think that I put my witchcraft above my druidry, or they're going to tell me that you can't be a druid and a witch, or they're going to be transphobic towards me in some way. And all these anxieties were building up based on, stories that you hear in the news of things like this happening and such. And then I went, and it was just so joyful. It was people running up to me, telling me how much they love my work, how much they love watching me roll down hills, talking about how fairies are pigs on TikTok. I had people coming up to me, telling me stories about their druidry, their magic, their witchcraft. And then I did my talk, and it ended in people getting up and clapping and
That's
giving
right.
me a standing ovation. And I felt the love in that room in that moment. And it was a clear reminder to myself to look for those joys. So my one hope is that you do see a lot more love and joy in the real world outside of the realms of social media and the news articles than you do out in the real world. You see so much more joy and hope out in the real world. But also, like, I think for people like us, for people like the lovely person who commented and myself, being queer people in this world right now can be scary. But
Yeah.
just know that the best protest you can do against it, the best thing you can do to act against it, is to live authentically and joyously, because queer joy is in essence a protest against something, and all it needs is for you to be happy. So be happy, be queer, be loving, and it's a protest in and of itself, so that gives me hope.
Living your own life and as being as authentic as you can. And for those who weren't at the winter gathering, um, Mara's talk is on Druidcast, so you can hear it. And she did get a standing ovation. Absolutely, it was amazing. So you need to, funny when my first gathering, OBOD gathering, I was worried because I'm Irish. I didn't know how I'd be accepted. Coming into Glastonbury, what I saw was an English Druid order, although it's global, and I was very impressed with the welcome I got. But people came up to me and said, "Oh, I'm Irish, or I've got a relatives or whatever it is." But I didn't know that because I'd experienced anti-Irish stuff during the Troubles and all that stuff, with our histories. And being a member of OBOD has healed the wound between the two countries for me. So, been really, really important. And I think it's about living joy. And Fable says, queer joy, yes, the joy of life. Emrys says, oh, I've got tears in my eyes, Mara and Eimear, you're fantastic. I didn't expect to be hearing all this when tuning in today. Well, neither was I. I have no idea. I mean, I knew I was talking to to Mara, but we never know where the conversation leads. And it's been such a joy. Absolutely. There's a question I ask. What's the most reckless thing you've ever done?
Oh
Apart
gosh.
from running down hills, challenging fairies. But what would you say has been the most challenging thing you've done?
Most challenging thing I've done. Oh, I'm not sure. I think it's always challenging to kind of um, to deconstruct all that you believe and all that you think in order to create a new path. And I've done a lot of that. I've had to do a lot of that in my life because of who I am. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, growing up in a really rural area, living with people who didn't understand me and didn't get me, like with who I am and what I am, I still grew up with certain things internalized into me, with certain beliefs and patterns and things internalized into me, and every day I have to challenge those things, and I hope that anyone listening also does that too. They challenge the beliefs that have been set into us from the moment we're born, that they question, when you have a response. And one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given is, rather than telling yourself off, rather than constantly looking down at yourself because you had a thought that was horrid, that had a thought that you consider was problematic in any way, remember that a lot of the times your first reaction to something is something that has been culturally ingrained into you by the process of your upbringing, by the things
Mhm.
that you've experienced. Your second reaction is who you truly are. The way that you react to your first reaction is who you are. So if you sometimes think things that are problematic and you think, oh God, why did I think that? That's awful of me. That's really horrid of me. That's really bigoted of me. The fact you had that reaction, the fact you thought that in your head afterwards, means that you're growing and you're learning and you're recognizing those elements of things that have been blasted into you by the culture, by the overculture, and now it's time to come out of it. But I think one of the most challenging things I've ever done personally was accepting my Welshness. I know a lot of people get kind of annoyed at me because I am so blatantly obsessed with Wales and Cymru and the Welsh language and what it is to be Welsh and such. But it took me a long, long time to be able to be this way. I wasn't raised with this pride of
Yeah.
like my identity, because I grew up in a situation where I almost felt ashamed to be myself, and almost felt like even the people around me, whether it was my family, my friends, my community, that they didn't really truly see me as fully Welsh. And I still come across those reeling emotions to do with that. Sometimes being able to speak the language fluently, being raised in the landscape, it's not enough because you don't fit into the community that you were raised
Ah,
in.
okay.
You
Yeah.
don't look the way that people think that a person of that way looks, or you don't sound the way that people think that should sound. You don't have the accent, you don't have the vibe, you don't have the whatever. So your identity is questioned. And because I've grown up with so many aspects of my identity being questioned, prodded, and poked, I lived for a long time with this shame about who I was and with this feeling that I wasn't allowed to be proud of my Welshness. Hence why I sound the way I do. I don't have a very strong Welsh accent because in my teenage years, I was ashamed of my Welsh accent and I trained it out of me. And I regret that so deeply now because once I kind of came to find the Anglesey Druid Order and I came to find Obod and Druidry and paganism in general, I then started embracing my Welshness as well. And that's why I'm such a red dragon flag waving Welsh lunatic now, because I want to show the world, you know, that there isn't one way to look when you're Welsh. You can be a big old queer weirdo like me running around hills talking about fairies and still be very Welsh. And you can sound like me, you can look very different to me, or you can look like I do now. So I wanted to kind of be the person that would have protected my younger self. And I'm glad to say that I
Mm.
think I've done that. But it's a constant, you know, constant challenge to keep doing that, to keep doing things every day that reaffirm that, that question and challenge those sides of you that are ingrained, that are, you know, problematic, but also to become the you that you know would have protected your younger self is a big challenge, but also worth it as well.
That is so, so beautiful. I I mean, you're not yet 30. This sounds very patronizing, and this is not what I'm saying because it was through my training as a psychologist is where I learned as an adult to go back to my younger self and be the support to my younger self that I could have been had I had the sense of life experience. Of course, you don't, but you know, you're a very young adult going back to that younger self, which is brilliant. That you have that incredible wisdom early. And one of my regrets is that I didn't wake up sooner. But then I don't know, I could have woken up sooner. But you know that I hadn't trusted myself much earlier because I let myself down by not listening to myself. But it's really interesting that you now are standing up and being who you are. And well done, a great role model. Well feckin' done.
Oh, thank you. Oh gosh.
I mean, how old were you when you transitioned? I mean, you know you're still so young. So
Oh gosh, that entire story. It's so I've always known who I am on a deeper level. I know that sounds cliche because everyone says it, but I did from as young as of an age I can remember. But of course, my family didn't have the terminology or the understanding to be able to do anything about it when I was young. And I do wish that that was a possibility for me when I was younger. It would have saved a lot of stress and a lot of self-hatred. But when I was a teenager, I kind of came to the realization at around 13 or 14 that I was trans. Finally had the terminology, watched a documentary on BBC Three, as you do, about trans people, and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds like me. Oh no. And then, you know, came to the realization that I felt this way all my life. But as I just mentioned in the challenges I faced, the biggest thing I had to overcome were the things that had been kind of placed into me by people who were not me. So I grew up with a father who was incredibly transphobic and homophobic, and you know, just coming out initially as gay at the age of 13 was difficult enough in my family. So it was hard enough being accepted by my brothers and by my father as somebody who was just, you know, identifying as gay. So when I finally felt I was accepted by them and I felt like maybe it was time to come out as trans, I remember vividly being told by a specific family member, I won't name who they were, that, you know, they can finally deal with the fact that I'm one of those gays. But if I was one of those trans people, they'd have to beat some sense into me
oh,
because
wow.
that is just, you know, something you can't do, you can't be. So at that point, I think I was around 14 when that happened, and I grew almost this sense of internalized transphobia, this hatred of trans people, because in my mind it was like, if I admit that that is what I am, I will lose the little acceptance I have among my family. So I hid it until I was 21. Until I was 21 years old. And then eventually I moved away to university. I went to
Yeah.
Manchester Metropolitan University, and it was there when I was around 19, 20 that I finally started telling people who I am and what's going on with me. And it was at 21 that I finally came out to my family. And so, yeah, that was in and of itself an experience.
And how are they with it now? Have they, apart from that person, but the rest of your family?
So, some family members have gone. Some family members have decided that they would rather me not be in their life. They think my transness is the kind of the line for them. But the vast majority of my family members have stayed and have supported, and they do their best. Sometimes they make little mistakes and they say things, as we all do because we're human. But for the most part, my mother, my sister, they are amazing. My grandmother, my auntie, like I have such a support system now around me, and I have a closer relationship with my family now than I think I ever have, even though I'm not living with them, because now I am truly me, and I feel like I can truly authentically express myself in any way possible around them, which is something throughout my entire childhood I didn't feel like I could do. Which is why the whole idea of looking back at my childhood and becoming the type of person who would have protected my younger self is such an important thing to me, because I feel like I didn't really get a childhood because of that. Hence why, on top of being a stark raving lunatic druid witch who runs around talking about fairy pigs and how Welsh women curse people with their tits, I'm also really childish, and I love, to collect troll dolls and dolls in general, and I love to dress flamboyantly, and I love to play, because I think I wasn't given the opportunity to really be allowed to just play and be a child when I was younger. And I don't think you need to stop playing and stop being childish just because you're a grown up.
I wouldn't call you childish. You are very childlike. You have that incredible freshness, and you love scarves. I just see you running off with scarves. You're trailing behind you. And the thing is, I think if ever, whenever we become ourselves and express ourselves as we truly are, we pay a price.
Mhm.
But we need to recognize, and hopefully, now at this point, it seems to be all the women in your family, that it's worth you standing up for who you are. I did that. I took a stand and I paid a price. But I can say it was worth it, because the price I paid for not being who I was and not trusting me was far higher than the price I paid for being who I am. And I think for all of us, being who we are, I'm willing to stand up. Now, my life wasn't in danger. But my I suppose not my physical life, but my psychological, my spiritual safety.
Yeah.
That's a different one. But anyway, it worked out in the end. Um, okay, Ricky says you have little choice but to grow old, but you get to decide if you want to grow up. That's true.
Exactly.
Mara, this is from Jan. You bring so much joy being you and have taught me much. Nimi, Mara, you speak so eloquently. Gabriella, your authentic self is a joy to the world, Mara. Uh, and then somebody else says, their loss, not yours. I'd be very proud to be part of your family. And Fable says, dear gods, I'm so sorry that was said to you. Um, and Karasu, the dreamer. I didn't know that I was non-binary until I was in my 20s. I never had a name for it and was given zero freedom of expression as a child. I mean, I was given zero expression as a child because children were seen and not heard, and we didn't contradict to our betters, etc., etc. And I'm glad to say that my own children could contradict me. It drove me cracked. But they are their own people, and I think that's just beautiful. Ricky says, oh, God bless you, Ricky. Because of my age, many folk mistake me for an adult. I'm sorry, I haven't made that mistake. So, but that is lovely. And I think I think this is a good time to end. Although we could, you know what, Mara, we could go on and on and on and on and on. But this has just been such a joy talking to you. And from the comments of our viewers, it's about standing up and being who you are, writing about your Welsh witchcraft, your Welsh fairyhood, you being trans, being who you are is such a joy. And you have a lot of fans here. And so I've only met you once, and now I'm meeting, well, that was at the Winter Gathering. And now selfishly, I get to know people better through these conversations rather than meeting, at a gathering. So it's been such a joy talking to you and hearing all you had to say. And hopefully the next time we will meet, we'll have another conversation as well. So from Ricky, Mara and Eimear, diolch. And Deborah says, keep doing it, Mara. So I would echo that. So I'm going to allow you to say goodnight to everybody, or good morning, good afternoon, or because some people will be listening on a recording, but just let you say what you need to do. You can have the last few words.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure being here and speaking to you again, and being able to just share in our joys together, and talk about these things on a deeper level, because obviously when we're at events we just cross paths a lot of the time. So it was nice to be able to actually sit down and chat, and hopefully we'll get to do it in person properly again sometime soon, maybe next to a real fire with some mead in hand. So thank you so much, Eimear, for having me again. And also just thank you, diolch o galon, to everyone who was listening in, and to the lovely comments that I'm told people were leaving. Thank you so much, diolch o galon. And if you would like to interact with my stuff more, then just be warned that I am like a rash. I'm very hard to get rid of now that you've brushed up against me, and hopefully you don't want to get rid of me. And even if you wanted to, it's quite impossible, because they do not sell anti-Mara fungal cream on the NHS. So deal with it. You're stuck with me now. But if you do want to reach out and find more of me, if you can deal with more of this, then do keep in mind that though my books and such are out there and you can find them, you can buy them, you can search Mara Starling on Google and they'll come up, I promise you. On top of that, though, I do also do a bunch of other stuff elsewhere. I run courses and online stuff via my Patreon, and you also get all sorts of unlimited stuff on there. You get all sorts of content on there that I post constantly rolling around for as little as like £10 a month. So come and find me there if you're able to support me. But even if you cannot buy my books, cannot support me monetarily, I will never hold that against you. And that's why I also have a ton of free stuff out there. You can follow me on TikTok, on Instagram. You can listen to my podcasts for free on Spotify or YouTube or wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. And you can watch my YouTube videos as well, which all talk about the magic and lore of Wales. So if you want to learn more about the magic of Cymru, then do come seek me out, where you will learn things like that pigs are actually fairies, that cheese was once used as a lie detecting magical device, and that Welsh women used to curse people by pulling out their tits and shouting profanities at their victims, hence why I'm so liberal with the swear words. So yeah, thank you so much, diolch o galon, nos da, or whatever it is wherever you are, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
So I look forward to seeing you at the Bardic Gorset, which will be in Penmaenmawr in July. I just realized we are going to be meeting. So I look forward to that. I'm just going to send you to the Vale because we're going to read the comments together. So I'll just say goodbye, but you don't go anywhere. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us this evening and for your wonderful comments. And Spellfairs, is Mara a tutor? No, but no, she's not. And you don't choose your mentor. I bet you, yes, you'd love to have her as a mentor. You get them assigned. You don't choose your mentor. But, as she says on Patreon, there's so many ways you can access and listen to her wisdom as well. So thank you all for joining me. And so have a good evening, good morning, good afternoon, or if you're watching a recording. And I look forward to being back here in 2 weeks' time. And it'll be experimental, because it'll be from a campsite in Glastonbury, where I'll have two guests, but we'll be all on the one screen. So hopefully that will work out, because that will be the Thursday before our summer gathering in Street. So with Glastonbury and Street are very close to each other, but I'll be camping halfway between Glastonbury and Street. So it'll be outside. So in the meantime, be well, be safe, and good night, live. Slán.